research and space law and policy in the field at the Catholic University of San Jose. I am a member of the GETRA and I will moderate this presentation today. First, I would like to give the floor to the President of the Association, Mr. Giuseppe Caldi, who will make the introductory remarks. Please, Giuseppe, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good afternoon, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Moon Village Association, I am pleased to host this side event, which is related to the presentation of the recommended framework and key elements for peaceful and sustainable lunar activity. The Moon Village Association is a non-governmental organization registered in Vienna since 2017, and the main goal is to act as an informal forum to bring together stakeholders from different parts of the world, meaning different organizations from industry, space agency, government organization, academia, and the public. At this point in time, we have about 50 member states, delegations participating from different countries in the organization, from institutional, well, individual. The Moon Village Association is also a permanent observer to the COPUOS since 2020. MVA is a unique organization, as it is the only one to bring together a multi-stakeholder forum and foster cooperation for lunar exploration and utilization. The activity of the MVA are of a lot of field, and today you're going to hear one of them. I'd just like to mention before closing the International Moon Day and the Lunar Commerce Portfolio, where this afternoon, later in the afternoon, there will be a presentation. And with that, I'll leave back the floor to you, Suyan. Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Now I will say a few words about our global expert group on sustainable lunar activities. As you all know, the increasing number of missions that are planned for the year, and in the coming year, raises a number of concerns from an operational perspective, with technical and legal implications, for example, the definition of standards for interoperability, information sharing about the activities, access to natural resources, preservation of sites of scientific or cultural importance, and many others. So, as Giuseppe mentioned, in 2019, the Moon Village Association established this international platform to discuss issues that are urgent, such as those that I mentioned, for the development of activities on the Moon, with the goal of de-risking future missions and increasing global cooperation for lunar exploitation and settlements. So this virtual forum hosts some multi-stakeholder discussions in the Global Expert Group for Sustainable Activities, the GETRA, and the GETRA, as Giuseppe mentioned, was proposed by 37 experts. Countries plus more than 150 observers who are now all participants of the GETRA, and it comprises representatives from all the sectors of society and industry, governments, as you mentioned, and diverse. It includes diverse perspectives. And for instance, it has participants from the US, China, Russia, from developing countries, and it is chaired by Mr. Lunar, who is here today and will speak within a few minutes. The group of experts worked for 2 years analyzing critical issues related to the exploration and use of the Moon. And during these years, we had monthly meetings in an online format, which is unprecedented for this kind of activity and made it possible for us to get to those results in 2 years. And this recommended framework and key elements for sustainable lunar activities, which is here, you must have received this booklet, is designed to provide certainty and predictability through mutual recommendations for all public and private actors that intend to conduct lunar activities under the principles of international law, such as the free access to activities and to celestial bodies, and also to promote a multilateral exchange of views in such activities, including legal, the technical, industrial, social, and economic aspects under the COPUOS, in addition to facilitating international cooperation and coordination of lunar activities. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Ian Christensen from the Secure World Foundation, who will present the recommended framework for you. Ian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Sian, and give me one moment to share the presentation. So hopefully that works. Can you all see the screen, the presentation on the screen? If I can just, is it on the room?
Perfect.
Perfect, very good. All right, so good afternoon. My name is Ian Christensen. I'm the Director of Private Sector Programs for the Secure World Foundation. Secure World Foundation is pleased to serve as a observer to COPUOS. I'm sorry I cannot join the session in person, but my colleague Chris Johnson will be there in person for the second week. But for today, Secure World also was pleased to serve as a member of the GEGSLA. And so I want to just give a overview very briefly of the key parts of the recommended framework and key elements for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities. Prior speakers already mentioned the motivations for GEGSLA, but there is very clearly an increase in non-governmental and governmental missions to the moon for commercial, scientific, and other aims. I think we should mention that just in the last 24 hours, we saw iSpace, the Japanese commercial lunar company, achieve lunar orbit with their first mission. So it's a significant milestone and a sign of things to come. There are a lack of coordination mechanisms for lunar activities, which poses challenges for the sustainability and safety of the future lunar environment, and indeed our ability to continue to use that environment. Some of these issues include creating mitigation of debris creation in lunar orbit, the need for standards for interoperability, and the need to de-risk lunar operations. So given these challenges in this situation and increasing activity, the Moon Village Association established GEGSLA in February of 2021. The working objectives of GEGSLA are to leverage contributions from a multi-stakeholder process, including space agencies, private companies, scientific community, and international organizations. We aim to include the public through consultation of actors across all levels of the space enterprise. And we aim to serve as a platform to exchange information and views within the community on some of these key issues that we saw in the need for the peaceful and sustainable conduct in lunar activities. And GEGSLA was intended to be complementary to activities within COPUOS or other international fora, such as the Space Resources Utilization Working Group and the Working Group and current discussions on long-term sustainability. So as I already mentioned, and physical copies are available to delegates, we published the recommended framework and key elements for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities in February of this year, which was the result of a 2-year process. GEGSLA was the working method. So we were hosted by the Moon Village Association and provided a secretariat. We had monthly plenary meetings over that two-year period from February of 2021 to 2023. Those were conducted primarily via virtual means. Our recommendations were developed through 4 subgroups focused on information sharing, safe operations and lunar environmental protection, compatibility and interoperability, and responsible governance. We had a public consultation, and we were financially supported by a number of industry, government, and civil society organizations. And the web link there at the bottom of the slide gives you more information on the organization and structure of the GEGSLA. So Jan already mentioned the very wide international aspect of our group. 37 experts were members in the first phase, representing 24 different countries in their individual capacity. And that was complemented by the work of about 195 observers from more than 40 countries. As GEGSLA continues in its current phase, all of these participants are now members, or are participants of the group. We have no longer a distinction between members and observers. So with the key elements for peaceful and sustainable lunar activities, we aim to provide a guide for well-balanced lunar projects, which covers norms for safe and sustainable lunar activities, focusing on coordination and management, building upon the principles in the international space law bodies and relevant UN treaties and other multilateral agreements. extends these existing principles into a framework which we hope will facilitate dialogue and cooperation and coordination among stakeholders, and aims to provide transparency, accountability, and certainty for all lunar stakeholders, both current and in the future. In this way, we hope that the GEGSA document is a living document, meaning it evolves and can update while it focuses initially on the near and medium terms. And we hope that GEGSA as the recommended framework is an input to the UN, to COPUOS, to start a discussion on a broader conversation around lunar coordination. The recommended framework is structured into 11 chapters. The first 4 chapters are a set of principles chapters. So essentially providing the objective, defining key terms, relating our work and our recommendations to the existing normative framework for lunar activities, and discussing the importance of coordination and management. Then the subsequent chapters 5 through 11 provide operational and governance suggestions in these key areas seen here. And I don't have the time to go through each of these, but covering anything from information sharing, interoperability, benefits, principles for a sustained lunar economy, and some aspects including human interaction. And so subsequent speakers will talk a little bit more in detail on some of these elements. The governance principles in the framework are supported by further documents which were developed in the GEGSA process, but do not represent a consensus product. These technical annexes are intended to complement the recommended framework. So technical and operational practices and case studies to provide a little more detail on sustainable lunar activities, and then a list of future issues. We also have complementary documents on sustainable cultural and natural heritage management in lunar context, and principles for environmental assessment of lunar activities. So GEGSA, in terms of next steps, we hope that the recommended framework provides the key next steps to ensure the peaceful and sustainable foundation of lunar activities. We offer that framework to the attention of COPUOS for further discussion and deliberation. And we do recognize that outcomes would be improved through community participation, including dissemination widely of the recommended frameworks, translations into languages beyond English, and working with industry to provide verification of some of the principles that we recommend through operational practice. GEGSA itself will remain in place as an informal consultation group for further development of coordination principles and to gather experience from ongoing missions. So there's the contact information down there for more questions. And again, the MVA website has a lot of this information. So thank you, and I will turn it back to Suyan now.
Thank you, Ian, for the presentation. Now we would like to share with you the perspectives of different stakeholders that are represented in the GEGSA and whose perspectives are reflected in the recommended framework which we present to you. First, I will give the word to Mr. Dorian Canario, who is the chair of the GEGSA, and he will speak as a representative of the governments. He is representing the government of Romania, but he's sharing the views of the concerns of the governments in general. Dorian, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Suyan. I represent the space agency sector, the government sector, as long as I'm a member of the board of the Romanian Space Agency, and for several years I lead this agency. And also we interact very closely with the European Space Agency and other agencies. So I think the lunar governance, it's a subject approached primarily by governments, and it includes a much wider perspective on the moon activities than just separate topics as space resources or exchange of information. I stress the fact that the legal aspects connected with the change of information is an important subject at any level of the exploration and exploitation of the moon. The subject of space resources becomes also a very important topic, being connected with the exploitation of the moon by public and private entities, but not earlier than 10-15 years from now, in my view. The urgent topic for now, in our view, is the management of the operations on the moon, accomplished by many nations in the future. As I said, information sharing is very important. Also, safe operations and lunar environmental protection, it's essential for the multiple operations and operators on the moon. We expect also some special situations on the moon until the new technology is tested and operators fully adapt to the moon conditions. In this case, it's recommended that compatibility and interoperability of several critical equipment of different operators should be ensured. A responsible governance usually addresses shared challenges and expectations related to the use and exploitation of the moon in order to ensure peace and security thereof, maintain sustainability, and benefit all humankind, what we all wish. The benefit for humanity is a specific topic with a more philosophical approach, let's say, but it should be discussed and analyzed in practical terms. A lunar economy will be developed in the future. Now it will be approached, and what we see now is just the beginning of the lunar economy by space resources, sending different equipment on the moon by private and public entities. And it will be developed and some rules should be established such way to de-risk operations and to ensure the cooperation of all stakeholders on the moon. In this framework, we should find some coordination mechanisms. And what we propose in the report of our GEXLA, it's how to approach and how to discuss in the framework of the UN mainly all these topics. And I think the governments and the space agency included are very important entities that should approach these things at the level of the UN, and not only approach, understand first and address all these topics, besides the things that are already discussed in the framework of the legal subcommittee, where we are now. Thank you, Sia.
Thank you very much, Dorian. Now we will hear Mr. Timothy Sichan, who is the space exploration architect at Lockheed Martin, and he will be speaking with us today, representing the industry. So please, Timothy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sion. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I wanted to cover the industry perspective today on why these recommendations, this recommended framework is so important. So a few points, and one that Ian mentioned is that there is urgency. iSpace is in orbit, planning to land at the end of April, and that is a commercial mission. It is not a mission of the government. We've got government missions coming up. We've got commercial missions supporting governments, such as from Intuitive Machines and Astrobotic, planning missions later this year. And then on the government side, China has already had multiple missions to the surface and are in the middle of an active campaign. And that's just robotic. The next flight on Orion will have an international crew to fly around the moon. And then on Artemis 3, we'll land people on the moon. So it is the time right now that we are planning out activities. At Lockheed Martin, we're planning a number of different commercial service businesses in orbit and around the lunar surface, such as communications, navigation, power, mobility. So we are actively right now planning both our business, our operations, designing the technical things that we need to do to operate on the surface. And so we need a stable legal framework to operate in. And of course, first is the rules of the country that we're operating from. But most of industry operates internationally. And so we need to have a set of consensus and an international perspective on how we want to operate on the moon. And we need to have that stability there to know how we're going to operate, because there's already enough risk in just operating on the moon, technical risk and business risk. That's a lot of risk to deal with. And so we're looking for an established set of norms of behavior for how we're going to operate, such that we don't have also legal risk or interoperability risk in addition to the technical and the business risk of operating on the surface of the moon. And having an appropriate risk profile is really important for private operations and for commercial investment in here. And so what we're seeing here in the future is both government activities and commercial activities operating on the moon, and private investment and commercial activities will really expand what those government activities can do from a science and exploration perspective and really enable sustained operations on the moon. So a few of the issues as examples I'll cover that we need to determine how we're going to operate. I'll give a few examples, and we've tried to address these in the recommended framework from GEGSLA. So the most important one is how do we prevent harmful interference from operating on the moon? And harmful interference can come in a variety of different ways. Of course, physical interference is clear, but also things like radio frequency interference, communication protocols, and the interaction with the lunar surface. So one of the things that we need to define is how are we going to share what we're doing on the lunar surface with the community? How are we going to define zones of safety for our operation to make sure that everyone knows where everyone is and can provide that safety in operations? And this is applicable, of course, for when humans are on the surface, but it's just as applicable for robotic operations. So that's one example. Another is sort of, I'll call it debris mitigation. So we're certainly aware of the issue in orbit around the Earth and around the moon someday about needing to be responsible and not create debris. But we also have to have that perspective with how we're operating on the lunar surface. We want to preserve the surface for sustained operations well into the future. And so we need to establish those norms of behavior today about how are we going to do that and protect and not generate dangerous debris. There's also questions of interoperability, which is something we would like to encourage. We would like to be able for different companies, different countries to be able to work together on the moon. How are we going to share standards for sharing resources, sharing power, communicating, such that we can build a community on the moon and be able to interact efficiently. And we need to define those standards of interoperability while also protecting folks' intellectual property. And so it's not as easy an issue, even though that goal of interoperability is very important. We also recognize that we need to protect both natural and cultural heritage on the lunar surface, and how are we going to do that? As well as there's a whole host of issues that we need to figure out how to behave when we bring humans to the moon. So just like the start of commercial missions in low Earth orbit, the commercial missions of humans on the moon bring safety issues and also raise the stakes and the importance for making sure that everyone is operating safely. And then the last point I'll make is that we'll have missions this year. As Ian mentioned, we wanted to understand what operational lessons learned are happening from these missions and bring that feedback into these discussions about norms of behavior, because we'll have ground truth, we'll have reality on the lunar surface about how things are going, and we want to make sure that we have the international conversation to make sure that our norms are set and can evolve with changing circumstances. So thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Ms. Alice Gorman, who is a researcher focusing on the archaeology and heritage of space exploration. And she's a member of the Advisory Council of the Space Industry Association of Australia. She will be speaking with us today on representing the academia and civil society. So Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Suyan. I hope everyone can hear me fine. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I acknowledge their deep and enduring connections to their lands and waters, and particularly their sky country. I offer my respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to the traditional owners of all the countries that people are joining us from today. So as Suyan said, I'm going to speak specifically to civil and academic space. And the recommended framework document that we've talked about has some key points for both of these groups. So when you talk to members of the public, or certainly when I do, about future lunar activities, a few issues consistently come up. First of all, there's surprise, because people are generally unaware that there is so much activity focused on the moon. We know this because this is our community, but despite the fact that there are constant news stories about what's happening in space, there is still a huge lack of awareness out there. The next reaction I tend to observe is concern. People are genuinely worried about environmental impacts on the moon. After you allay their fears that lunar mining won't affect the moon's orbit and hence won't affect the tides, it's then really common for people to say something like, well, after what we've done to Earth, how dare humans propose to do this to another planet? So this seems to indicate that the public isn't convinced by the benefits that might come from further lunar exploration, and they don't think that lunar operators can be trusted. And I'll add too that since the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing in 2019, there's also a heightened awareness and interest in the lunar cultural heritage sites. So I also get a lot of people asking what is going to happen to them in the future period of accelerated surface activity. So to get public support for future lunar activities, it's really critical to engage with these concerns. And while the treaties and some high-level principles documents like the Hague Building Blocks emphasise that there should be no harmful impacts on the moon, the recommended framework of the GEGSLA develops this concept in more practical depth. So one thing we do is define what serious environmental harm on the moon is. So I'm going to just paraphrase quickly from the recommended framework. Environmental harm is an adverse effect on the lunar environment that is not trivial or negligible in nature, extent, or context, that hinders the use of the moon for scientific or commercial purposes or for safe human habitation. Serious environmental harm is adverse effects that are irreversible, of high impact or widespread, or cause adverse impacts to environmental areas with high conservation value or scientific or special significance. So that's an indication of how the recommended framework document is giving us some more practical things to hang on to around these concepts. So this is just one example from the recommended framework, but basically our aim has been to make, to provide context and detail that will enable practical actions to be taken and to give the public something concrete to hold lunar operators accountable for. So this is essential to the practice of sustainable activity on the moon. And this is far from idealistic thinking because, as we've heard, the GEGSLA has had government, academia, and industry actively working together. And I think the ways we've extended a lot of these concepts that are already present is offering something genuinely new. The GEGSLA has also produced reference documents on environmental impact assessment and on natural and cultural heritage management, which you can find on our website if you go to have a look. Now, heritage reference document is the first one to integrate natural and cultural heritage values in line with contemporary research, which leads me to my final point. So I want to note that the recommended framework is informed by academic research and has outcomes for research. It recommends the protection of places of scientific significance, including cultural significance. And the pursuit of lunar science and understanding our place in the cosmos is framed as a benefit of future lunar activity. And of course, ensuring that future generations have the same opportunities to pursue science this is absolutely the essence of sustainability. So because of that, the recommended framework places a big emphasis on information sharing. And just to quote from the framework again, this one article is, stakeholders should factor information sharing into the design and implementation of lunar activities and consider partial or conditional sharing of information if commercial or other competing considerations require otherwise, as Tim alluded to earlier. So a commitment to information sharing enables those of us who work in universities to train students in lunar science and hence contribute to future research and industry. And this is also an incredibly important precedent to establish for the rest of the solar system. So I encourage everyone to study the recommended framework. And of course, we welcome your feedback as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. Now we will hear the perspective of the new generations who are now represented today by Mr. Antonino Salmeri. Antonino is the policy coordinator at the Space Generation Advisory Council. And please, Antonino, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lian. Appreciate the opportunity to speak about the recommended framework here from the room in Vienna. And hello, everyone who's joining also online. So much has been already said about the importance of the work that GEGZA has been doing and in different perspectives from the public sector, the private sector, and academia. But I think what ties it really all together is this concept of sustainability that Alice was mentioning before. And from the perspective of the young generation, sustainability is exactly being able to hand over, hopefully, a better world to those who come after us. I currently represent, let's say, the young generation of today, but when we look at the moon, which has a very long time horizon, we hopefully think of people that still have to be born and generations in the future that will hopefully live and work on the moon and laying the foundations for them to be able to do that in a safe manner, in a prosperous manner, without spoiling opportunities that they may have. So it was a difficult exercise, the one that the GEGZA group participated into, and I had the pleasure of contributing to it as one of the subgroup co-chairs, especially for information sharing, together with my colleague Raji Palan. We have been diving a lot into anticipating things that we don't even know how they're going to play out. So there was this challenge of looking proactively to the future, but to develop something that can be adapted. I think this balance between proactiveness and adaptiveness is the sweet spot that the recommended framework tries to achieve. And it is something that we inherited also from our predecessor, the International Space Resources Governance Working Group, which has been the first one to promote this multi-stakeholder, inclusive, and adaptive approach to governance of space resources first, and now lunar activities. I would say that also the perspective of the young generation is very much connected to the one of developing countries and environmental aspects as well of our space, because we all share let's say, the worry, which is not a real worry, but something to keep in mind, that activities today may prevent activities in the future. So again, we need to be able to create something that enables the timing activities that we want to conduct, but to do so in a way that we're not preventing others from conducting the same in the short term, which applies to emerging space countries, which will be able to be on the moon a bit later, and in the very long term, when we're going to have new generations approaching the moon. I do believe that this point was constantly kept in mind by the GEGZA group, at least from my experience as a member. And I appreciated that very much as representative of the young generation. It's something that SBC, Space Generation Advisory Council, has always been advocating since 2 years now, when we developed the EGO report on governance, which is a document that I would say is very much aligned with the recommended framework. So I think to sum up, the question is, what do we do next, right? And I think there is a lot to do. The recommended framework provides a very good foundation for further consideration in new and COPUOS. At the same time, as the other panelists have already mentioned, there are a number of initiatives that could be taken building on the spirit of the recommended framework, I would say. So I think the challenge will be to make sure that we can continue to go in the same direction, and the good news is that we are already at a very positive stage, being all involved in the go and build into the same spirit of enabling safe and sustainable lunar activities. So obviously, COPUOS will consider the recommended framework as it finds appropriate. Right now, there are no specific items to discuss lunar coordination or lunar governance or lunar information sharing, like we need to call it. But there are still ways to make sure that this is kept into account. And then when the time will come, surely take the appropriate action that delegates find as more appropriate. And in the meantime, I would say that all members of TEFLA will continue to exchange views and to conduct initiatives complementary to the work of COPUOS and building upon the spirit of the framework, as this group has already done. So I would say that we are on a positive track, and very grateful to the Media Association for setting up GEXLA, to the participants, and obviously to the panel that joined today for, I would say, this very important event. And with that, I think we have about 5 to 10 minutes, and so I'll leave it back to Suyana if we have questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonino. Well, it is clear that there are multiple concerns related to the development of formations and future activities and settlements on the moon. And by providing a neutral forum for multi-stakeholder debates, the goal of the GEXLA is to address those concerns by providing a very comprehensively approach and promote cooperation and good governance now and in the coming years. So the document offers an approach from a very operational level and is considered to be complementary to other initiatives such as the Artemis Accord, exactly because it provides a more detailed and pragmatic approach to many urgent topics, as my colleagues have already gave some examples. And all the delegations of member states should have received the booklet of recommended framework, and there are copies available for the institutions with observer status that may want it as well. And the document is also available on the webpage of the GEXLA through the Moon Village webpage. So please feel free to go there and take a look and study this document. Before opening for questions of the audience, I would also like to talk about the way forward of the GEXLA, because the work that has been presented today is just the beginning of multilateral discussion. Now, the GEXLA is entering the operational phase, and at this stage, all participants, who are now around 200 people, are working on the implementation of the recommendations, gathering feedback from the public, and publicizing those recommended frameworks. So we expect to have a positive impact on mission planning, on activities design, policies, legal framework, and discussions at the UN level. So your comments will be very welcome, either now or by email to our secretariat. And now I will open the floor for the audience present here, or if you have any questions online as well, or comments you may want to share with us. I have a question from the audience, please.
Thank you, Suyana, and congratulations on the Moon Village Association work. I have many questions, but I will summarize it into 2. First is regarding the framework. How did you address, or how have you discussed what are the way forward in terms of liability? And the second question is there any overlap between the various initiatives regarding moon activities? We know that other groups are already working on the policy, for instance. So how do you coordinate all those efforts?
Thank you for the question. Maybe Antonino would like to address them. Thank you.
Of course, thank you very much for your question. Starting with liability, I would say that even though we already know that there are rules in place under Article 7 of the Aerospace Treaty and under the Liability Convention that refer to a specific liability regime that applies to all space activities, and in particular in space. There is a fault regime later. So discussion will focus on the development of those standards that allow us to understand what fault means in the context of which is a challenging question for those in the sense that it is not at the moment possible to identify those standards because we don't even have activities. At the same time, we want to have some reference in order to be able to adjudicate disputes if an accident should occur. So we have been reflecting on these needs, and I think it would be also good to hear from Timothy from the industry perspective of what do they consider as appropriate, not too much regulation, but also that regulation that would give them the legal certainty that if there is an accident, there will be appropriate consequences on those who therefore the question that actual fault means. In terms of coordination in other activities, I would say that members of GEXLA come from different stakeholder groups, as was already identified in this event, and are party to many different initiatives. And that, I think, is the key element, the individuals involved that are able to coordinate the different initiatives by participating and ensuring that we can go the same direction.
Thank you, Antonino. I believe Giuseppe has something to add here at this point regarding the initiatives, different initiatives. Giuseppe, would you like to take the floor?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think Antonino already indicated that basically the coordination is assured by the participation. That's what Antonino rightfully said. And I think there are some other initiatives later in the week that they will talk about that. However, what we felt is that it's very important with this document to bring on the floor of the Science and Technical Subcommittee, Legal, as well as the COPUOS, the issue of lunar coordination is a very important one. And I think a number of delegations, we are aware, they have already proposed a way forward, in particular to the Science and Technical Subcommittee, as well as hopefully to the COPUOS. Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you, Antonino, for your answers. Yes, I have another question from the room. Please go ahead first. Do you like to introduce yourself?
This is work. Okay. Thank you. Okay, is this better? Okay, so my name is Soyoung Chung, and I'm part of the Republic Commission. And thank you for the very interesting presentation that allows us to get the documents that you have provided, and I will take it back to make a presentation that I should give on my colleagues. So my question, I don't think I should go early, yes. And my question is, the document that it builds on those already established in the law, and you mentioned about proposed LTS guidelines and for the law, and then other major references. And I would like to know what are the commonalities between the work that you just done and the other documents.
Thank you very much for your question. I believe maybe Ian, would you like to address this?
Yes. So I can start, and I think I heard most of the question. Is a little bit difficult connection. So I think the question was about the other frameworks and principles that are out there, Artemis Accords, LTS, Hague Group, and how our work aligns with those. Is that more or less the question? Yeah.
Yes, the commonalities and the differences.
Yeah, so it is a very good question. So we as part of the GEGZA process, we reviewed many of those documents out there. We had members of our group that were involved in drafting those documents and different ones, and we're able to share that experience. So I think what we have done in many cases is, where possible, provide further detail on some things. So there was work done, for instance, in the Hague Group and in the Artemis Accords that talked about safety zones. There's further work within GEGZA that further elucidates and provides detail there. Similar with interoperability. So we take some of the existing statements and principles around interoperability and suggest further work there. We also, outside of the space, specifically, we looked at principles for heritage preservation from outside of the space sector and kind of brought that in. So I think what we tried to do is provide a little bit further detail where we could, and then where there are future issues that were raised by those groups and further discussed in GEGZA, we identify those as well. So that's how I would answer that, but I would welcome remarks from my colleagues on the panel as well.
If I could just add to that, so we were very conscious that we were building on a very substantial and important corpus of work of principles and guidelines, but we were very clear that we wanted to have practical things that industry could take forward and use and do things with. But of course we had to strike a very fine balance, because as Antonino alluded to, there's the how much regulation is appropriate at this stage. But I think we achieved it. So we took those principles from all of those other documents, and then we dived deeper into what were the practical implications, but also keeping in mind the sort of legal and philosophical implications. So, and obviously that was helped by the fact that there was so much intersection, so much overlap between people who'd worked on the different things. So I like to think that we got it right.
Thank you very much, Alice and Ian, for your answers. I believe that clarifies a little. And then I believe we have to get to the closing right now, because we have to go to the session of the COPUOS Legal Subcommittee. So thank you very much for the interaction. And as we approach the end, I would just like to mention that GEGZA is still accepting participants. So if you are interested, please contact us with the Secretariat or through me or Antonino, and we'll make it possible. We'll be the contact. And then also GEGZA is accepting sponsors as well. So we would like, if you would like to sponsor our activities, you are welcome to contact us as well. And we'll also releasing a newsletter, which will be available on the website in the next weeks, within the next week. So feel free, and you're welcome to look for it in the website and subscribe. Now I handle the floor to Giuseppe for his concluding remarks. Thank you. Giuseppe, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Suyan, and thank you to all participants. I think I hope this was giving you an indication of what we have been doing. And of course, we are looking forward to engage with all of you, space agency, as well as actors of other organizations, including NGO. So with that, I'd like to close the event and I wish you good continuation of the meeting. And this afternoon, we will have another presentation from MBA in the technical presentation. Thank you and have a good day to all of you. Bye-bye then.
Thank you very much.